Woden, for those who aren't aware, was the king of the English gods. He's very much equivalent to Odin in Norse mythology. And it was necessary for the pagan Anglo-Saxon kings to trace their descent to him. Not all of them. Some of the royal houses trace descent to other gods, but most of them to Woden. And this tradition was preserved after Christianity. However, it had to be neutralized. And so they simply said that Woden was... they also added an extra genealogy connecting Woden to Noah, so that Woden was one of the people on the ark or something like that.
Yes.
So that he was integrated into the Christian Jewish mythology. But they didn't want to do away with this very time-honored tradition, which distinguished the upper class from the lower class.
I seem to recall there was also an idea that the Norse gods were descended from the Trojans.
This is something that isn't a pagan tradition. This is something completely unrelated.
And they go back ultimately to Zeus.
Yeah, well, this claiming descent from Trojans, the first person to do that is a French author in the Migration era, and he claimed that the origin of the French was in Troy. And later, as the medieval era catches on, like Christian monks all over Europe start claiming that they're descended from Trojans, because once we shift to a literate culture, we prioritize and value the cultures that are attested in literature, and that meant basically either people who are in the Bible or people who are in the classical tradition, like the Trojans and the Greeks. And as far as this privileging of literary sources, which we still have now, resulted in people almost not believing the other peoples in the world had existed, because if they're not in the Bible, they're not mentioned by the Greeks, and they probably didn't exist as far as they're concerned. But now we know from DNA, we're unearthing the real story of the Bronze Age Europe, which doesn't, of course, match at all these. I mean, for hundreds of years, I think a significant amount of people in Britain believed that the British descended from Brutus and the Trojans who came here with him, which is, of course, made up by a Welsh monk at some point. But yeah, it's not unique to Britain. Like, the Icelanders had made up something about them all being descended from kings of Troy and Scythia, and the French started it. It's just a fashion which prioritizes literate cultures in the East over the indigenous cultures of Europe.
Well, you mentioned, before I move on to that DNA issue, which I think is very interesting, why is it then that some of the Anglo-Saxon kingdoms wanted descent from gods other than Woden?
Because they were polytheist, and Woden wasn't the only god of significance to them. The earliest sources we have on Germanic people is Tacitus, the Roman historian, and he says that the different Germanic peoples descend from 3 different progenitors, which are probably gods, and he divides them up into the categories. He actually divides them ethnically into the descendants of these 3 different gods: Istio, Eirmin, and Ing. Ing is quite easily identified in English paganism as Yngvi Frey, who is called in Norse paganism Freyr. He's king. He's also mentioned in later medieval sources as being a king in Uppsala. Euhemerism is a technique in Christian, by Christians used to say, okay, yeah, those gods, those were just people, right? You're just worshipping a big king of old times.
Well, Euhemerus said that Zeus was a person, didn't he?
That's what he started. Euhemerus was from pagan times, but Euhemerism is not originally a Christian technique, but it's mostly associated with Christian authors because it became a way to discredit paganism later on, and also to preserve their national myths because people still had nationalistic pride, but they didn't want to associate with, they didn't want to, say that basically in Christian theology requires that the gods of your ancestors were either demons or people, because they can't be gods because there's only one God according to their belief. So it's much more flattering to say that your ancestors worshipped a great king than to say that they worshipped a demon. So they would try and say that actually it was just a great king that fooled everybody into thinking he was a god.
Are you ready for the future of the West?